Hello, everyone, and welcome to Insert Title Here. I'm your host, Austin Kennedy, President and CEO of Wright Service Corp. And yes, we are still casting about for a legitimate and decent title. But, I've kind of come to accept that this, which started off as a bit of a shtick, might actually be a legitimately good title. It's a survivor. It's kind of like the cockroach in nuclear winter. There's nothing going to take it out. So I think we might stick with that. But if any clever folks out in the crowd have better ideas, please hit us up in the comment section. And as you know by now, on this podcast, we talk to a cast of characters from the environmental sciences and UVM industries, and in so doing, shed a little bit of a light on our little corner of the world that is oftentimes under the radar. So our guest today is none other than Wes Tregilgas. Wes joined Wright Tree Service after working in vegetation management for two large investor-owned utilities. Prior to working for the utilities, he worked for other utility line clearance contractors in their safety departments after operating his own commercial arboriculture company for 10 years. Wes has received outstanding customer service awards from industry organizations and recognition from utility executives for finding new methods of creating an innovative customer experience. Wes is an International Society of Arboriculture ISA certified arborist and is an ISA utility specialist, serves on industry organization boards, and chaired the Michigan Tree Climbing Championship for several years. And more recently, he won the UAA 2025 Will Nutter Silver Shield Award, which was totally awesome and pretty emotional for me, at least. We can get there. That was a big day. And in 2024, you won the Employee of the Year award for Wright Service Corp, which is a award that relates to our ESOP and the culture that we're building with our ESOP. And because of this award, I am forever grateful to you for maybe a reason that you don't appreciate or that comes to mind immediately. Because of the award ceremony, which is also part and parcel of our annual banquet, you sat with my parents and you talked to them the whole night and you kept them totally charmed and entertained, and hardly a visit goes by from my mother that she doesn't ask me about you and what I've done lately to advance your career. Wow. So thank you, because that night was huge for them. Nora Kennedy loves Wes Tregilgas.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you also recently received a very well-earned promotion to Wright Tree Service's Vice President of Safety, Education, and Training. Wes, you've had quite the run these last couple of years, and I am so excited to have you on our humble little podcast here. Let's start on the personal side of your story. Let's jump back into the Wayback Machine with your origin story. Where did Wes begin? Oldest child, youngest child?
Yeah, I'm the oldest of two. We're probably 15 months apart, so fairly close that way. And was born in Southern California, but spent some of the early years growing up in Central Indiana. And that's where kind of the environment and outdoor love really took off, I think, at that point.
Okay. Or Southern Indiana?
Central, yeah, just north of Indy, really.
And what was it about the area? What's your earliest recollection of your time in nature around trees that you think kind of sets you on this course in life where trees have been so central to everything that you've done?
Yeah, I think it's all the sensories that are involved with it, right? And you remember when you were talking with our just recent podcast there about tree collisions, and leaf collisions,
with
and all
Rich.
that. Yeah,
Rich
and that's a real thing, and especially being up in the trees. But nowadays, I would never free climb to this height. But as a kid, I've went to the tops of incredible trees, and there's no securement whatsoever. You're a child climbing up there, and but just all of that interaction with it, the piles of leaves in the fall, and you dive underneath them, and predominantly sugar maple. Not every leaf is a great leaf to breathe in, I'm sure.
Right.
But yeah, 10 feet of sugar maple leaves is a lot of fun. You got a couple of refrigerator boxes buried underneath them, and it's a fort. And,
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
That's all a good time.
Adam Larson, your good buddy, has a similar story, probably not as young, but being, up at the top of a tree and a competitor tree firm of ours pulling up next to him in the bucket and saying, "What are you doing up here, son? If you're up here right now, you should come and work for us." Right. So yeah, I think tree climbing is kind of a common denominator in how some of us get to this industry. So I read, in the intro about the career path that you've taken, and specifically the fact that you've worked both as a employee of private contracting firms, but also as an employee for multiple investor-owned utilities. What is it, Wes, from your time working with utilities, that helps you understand how they think, how they want to be handled as a client, and how have you incorporated that knowledge or that perspective into the role that you now have for us in servicing those investor-owned clients?
Yeah, that's really great insight. Looking towards what we get as an insight or understanding from being on different rooms, their spaces, right? And it's the competition of needs, and so every organization has competing needs, and they're going through a very large kind of an industry upturn. Is the fact that most of them are very large organizations considered to be almost governmental size. And for a long time, they've been the monopoly, right? And so there hasn't been really ever a need, even in the customer experience space, to be that worried about it. You didn't have a choice. When you get your power company, you can't choose between 5 providers. You get stuck with whoever's got the franchise agreement. And now that is changing. There's a market disruption with individual solar and lots of other ways that you can even collectively get together and build microgrids, and all of that is rapidly moving forward. And so this long-term infrastructure is no longer looking in the future as the same thing it's always been. So now there's all of a sudden right underneath them opportunities for the market to change, and then there's market demand. So what we're using electricity for 20 years ago is not what we're using it for today. So the challenge around that is that that's a new market, which is probably where they need to be sustainable in. But how do you set up your infrastructure to serve the new market? And so the other challenging part is how you're structured as an organization, and that's for any company. And you look at utilities that are structured as a investor owned, they're on the stock exchange publicly, versus maybe a cooperative and they have a membership guild, right? And then you have government owned or things like that. And they all have different organizational structures, which drives what happens inside the decision making, what's important to them. And so it's just interesting to see what some of those challenges are. They're not what you think they are necessarily from the outside, because you're only receiving whatever messaging you get. But there's lots of things that their 20-year business plan has a tremendous amount of work ahead of them to address a couple of things. One of the big things that the utilities currently under for change is the fact that most of the infrastructure that went in the 50s and 60s and 70s is all coming up due for replacement. And so on top of having a market disruption, meaning the game that you've always played for who wants your electricity and where it needs to be distributed to, being a challenge, you have a second challenge. Your current infrastructure isn't necessarily going to be good for the near future. So how do you rebuild that to also address where this market's going? And so that is the active business development plan inside there. But I think from the outside, when we look at just vegetation management, there's a lot of pressures and pulls and moves and things that we don't always see when from the contractor side, you're getting messaging out that says, well, now we're moving here, or we're going left instead of right, or whatever. And it seems very rash or something like that. But in reality, there's a lot of things that has to juggle. And that volume of budget towards that type of work is a fast place to go to make a correction.
Yep. So part of your biography too talked about the fact that you've received some recognition for probably adjustments, new programs to user experiences within utilities. For me, that struck me as an interesting note, because I assumed that you were probably working in areas of safety, or you were working in things related to line work or something along these lines. Maybe I should ask you what you did do for the utilities. But how is it that you came into this sphere of UX and user experience and enhancing that? What was that experience?
Part of it was you're a piece of the customer journey map being in vegetation management. And so the end user, the person that's got the meter and they're buying the product, right? Their only way to interact with the utility is in the past been you had to reach them directly by phone or mail or something. And now that's all shifting, how society wants to communicate with their power company. And it's very challenging to have conflict and difficulties in the field around vegetation management and somehow get that through and have all that messaging appropriate. If you think about the challenges they have as a utility is to appropriately notify and sell why vegetation management has to happen. So there's some level of understanding before the work happens. That eases a lot of it, but there's still a lot of conflict around that. And one of the things that I was looking at is that when you look at a metric for customer sat or things that didn't happen the way that's ideal, and you're comparing like, well, we had 5 preventable complaints or we had whatever, it doesn't really contrast until you can adequately understand what your success rate is. And so you can say you don't want 50 complaints coming through that were in a course of a year, maybe preventable in the sense that you had a program in place to not have that show up, and it did, right? Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, what's the contrast? What's the number of the impact that was positive? And so that's where I went pursuing it and finding out why it was positive, and why are we not capturing that? And are we doing that well enough? On the negative side, if you think about any kind of a negative situation, we spend a lot more of our time and energy on something that's negative impacting our life than something that's positive.
100%.
So
absolutely.
If you think that somebody out there in large governmental organizations has a gripe or a complaint towards something that we probably do in the industry, it's a fair share that there's always, another probably 20 or 30% that feel the same way, and they just don't ever share their angst about it. So it's very important to pay attention to those messagings that do come in that are negative because it represents a larger pool. But there's probably even a greater pool that don't say anything at all, and they don't interrupt their life or take time out of their day to even share their idea around what it is they do feel positive. And so it's really tough to get positive information coming into a utility because people aren't compelled necessarily to tell their power provider that, can you imagine going up to the wall socket, right? And you plug it in and your only objective is to get your iPhone to turn back on, which takes like 5 minutes, right? Because when it goes dead, you wait and wait and wait.
Right.
And good thing for the Samsung phones. They don't have to do that, right? It turns on almost immediately.
Does it really? I've never.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have the iPhone delay, right?
Okay.
You lost the conversation. It's probably good. Can you imagine some of the conversations you're having where your phone dies and it was probably like, some sort of note from God that you probably needed to stop talking anyway. And so you got to plug it back in, and that's the time to like change your emotional state. And so maybe Apple, Steve Jobs had that build is just like
unintended consequence.
Yeah, if it was, right. But you plug it in, you go to the wall socket, you plug it in, and you're not like, whatever energy company, right? I'm so glad that you're working today.
Right.
You're like, come on, iPhone, right? There's a disconnect between the product and service. Yeah. And before they never had to worry about it because if you never had competition, you don't have to worry about where your energy comes from. Right. But there's not a logo that's required in your home. Can you imagine if every wall socket in your home had to have the logo of the energy company that was providing that? And so there's a disconnect between where that product and service is. And now it's actually a real critical thing for them because their brand and their logos and what they sell and their ethos needs to reconnect with the user because now there's options coming in the future. So when you plug in your iPhone, we don't always think that what's happening right there, that all these people, all these different locations, all the stuff that's happens to take, a kilowatt of energy produced and delivered to wherever you are in that location at that wall socket so you can get back on with your life. None of that is factored or understood. And so now you see entire billboards around the company or country. I've got a whole folder saved every time I see a billboard with a power company promoting that they're providing energy, right? That's marketing dollars spent in an area that they've historically in their industry never had to market before. And the reason why is that they have market disruptions coming that need to put them back in the forefront. They have to re-engage with their client. Right. And so the challenge came to be is, well, wait a second, we're doing great things. So there has to be some way to measure that, even though it's very hard to get someone compelled to send that in, And so much of the work that I did was finding ways to get the metric in to have a true balance of what you think the positivity is around the things that we do. Now, we even at the contractor side will get messages in appreciation, and people reach the power company and all those kinds of things. But it doesn't represent nearly the amount of touch points you have. So, for instance, if you were to go trim out an entire electrical circuit, and maybe in a dense area, the electrical circuit provides 8 or 10,000 customers, could be in this large circuit, right? And a customer is a meter. It's not the number of people there. So if you have number of customers out during an outage, that isn't necessarily the number of people affected. It could be an average household of 3 or 4. So you got to multiply that if you want to know how many humans are affected by that outage. But you look at all those meters, all those customers, and you had 5 really rough complaints that came in that were valid, right? And there was one person that said out of the 5, there was one person in each location, maybe it accumulates to 20 of, man, we really thought the crews looked great. They're professional. I had good communication. The power company told me what was happening ahead of time. They resolved my issue without me having to invest a lot of time and all those kinds of things, right? And you look at that metric and say, oh, we're good. We're 20 in the positive. We got 5 and everything's like that. And I wouldn't believe it. I wasn't willing to believe that. I wasn't willing to believe that we, whether we were asked or not, engaged with 10,000 meter properties, and only 20 people were really thrilled about it. But knowing psychology, you're not going to get that much compelling time invested in sharing that. And so what are the methods and things that we could do to capture more of that, to truly understand what it is that we are doing well, in contrast to obviously what was shared that wasn't working at all. And so that was the time spent. It was all driven from obviously the touch points of vegetation management. And that's why I think it's so critical, is that think about the power company's model 30 years ago, and who would they interact with? And the person they would interact with almost immediately was the meter reader. And so monthly, at least, just like the postal service, you would have a person from your community. You might even know them, but they regularly come through and they have to read the meters for both gas and electric. And all those kinds of things are going away through technology. And so by default, just through what's evolving here, there's more and more disconnect between the end user of electricity and the provider, just the nature of the environment. And so along comes vegetation management, and they're now the last and most frequent touch point representing the power company that engages with the meter reader. And so now vegetation management is actually carrying the banner of all things of that utility's ethos, what they stand for, what they expect, how they want to engage their client. It's the urban forestry and utility forestry folks. That's the ones that are doing it. So anymore, if you look at the attrition in the call centers, as people leave, they drop them off, and then they add 3 or 4 different desk spaces of Facebook Messenger people. And so now, instead of having a person dedicated to all these phones to take in the complaint or what the information is, you have people monitoring 4 or 5 different lines of chat. And in our busy lives today, along with a society that's almost a 2-income household common situation, we don't have the time to settle or solve challenges with our primary service providers that really would be necessary to win. We just can't allocate that kind of time. We barely have enough time to allocate towards signing a child up for a soccer club, and all the forms and all that, right? Even that's a headache for life.
That is a massive headache.
Yeah. So can you imagine now I need to reach my power company or your internet provider, one of these different folks. It's become a real challenge. So in your lack of time, society has moved to chats, because you can run a chat while you're doing something else, right? You're not sitting online and hold on, let me find out what this is and all those kinds of things. So it fits and integrates into life. But again, we're losing connection with the customer because now it's electronic, right? There's no voice, there's no way to really even share empathy through a chat. I love the empathy. You can tell the scripts, and my first objective right now is figuring out how to overcome the chat bot to get me to a real person who's running the chat. How do you default out of that position? And you're just hitting the scripts that are coming through there, and you're like, it's like trying to write a really good AI prompt. You know, you're trying to figure out what's the prompt to get this chat to give up.
Right.
And because I need somebody that can understand something. I don't fit in that box. You know, they have in their journey mapping now, when you come through those types of engagements, they've tried to think of 30 or 40, or maybe it's 200, who knows, of possibilities, because they want you to fit into something filterable to help you. But most often in the human world, it's really hard to fit into one of those. And so I'm always trying to circumvent that. But that's the engagement. Utility forestry is the true human engagement, representing an entire industry that we don't think enough about, but we rely on every second of our lives. And they need to get the credit for the things they're doing really well. And it's hard to extract that from the end user. And that was kind of my directive.
So at a fundamental level, originally, all they were accumulating was negative data points. And you were like, there's got to be a larger context to this. There's got to be a more robust data set. How do we go about collecting to create like a positive context, or maybe even just a statistically reliable context around user experience? And you had, I'm catching here that you achieved this through the Vegetation cruise. What was the methodology? Did you administer surveys? Was it follow-up telephone calls? Was it knocking on doors? How did you gather the more robust data set?
How to capture it, right? Well, first you have to understand what's the potential, right? So of course, positive calls are coming in, but I knew that it wasn't equal to what should be in comparison to the data set. The data set is there's 10,000 meters out here, and we got 5 nasty complaints that we definitely don't want to repeat. And we've got maybe 25 or 30 happy folks. And you think, oh, perfect. You know, we're better than we were worse or whatever. But when you look at 35 and 5 over 10,000, you're missing a lot there. And what I do know is that the 5 represents probably 150 others, right, that feel the same way. And so you have to really validate. And they didn't take the time. And it's aggravated. They might be still brewing on it. It's still things that you're going to pop into later on. And so you have to be able to look at how you got into some of those messes and address them, because it's greater than what came through. But on the flip side, it's even more greater. So think about positivity. If there's 50 positive things that come through in a quarter or something like that, and knowing that that takes far more effort for somebody to take time out of their day to even send in, then what's the real number there of what we're doing great at? And if you knew in a better data set what things are being really appreciated in the field, then you get a chance to start to build your program around the things that are really welcomed by the end user, because there's just a large disconnect between the power company and so you want to bridge it. So what do we do? When you have, there's 2 things to it. One is where do you find them? How do you find the appreciation? That was my biggest challenge. Is I know it's out there. How are we going to get it? We already have all these means. They know they can reach people, both at the contractor and at the utility. There's avenues there, but how do we make it to where we could reach them right in that moment, right? Because once the moment's gone, they're not going to re-engage it. I've got 2 or 3 people right now. One is at National at Boston. There's a gal named Jordan there that she needs a compliment sent in, right? And that was from 2 months ago. That wasn't recent, and I haven't done it yet, you know. And you're like, that person's still. Hopefully, they're still working there. Like they need this. They have this coming, right?
Yep.
But it hasn't yet. It hasn't compelled you to do that. Now, if Jordan or somebody at National just roasted you and you had this horrible thing, I would have probably even taken PTO to make sure it got done that Friday, right?
Overnighted a heavy map paper complaint.
Yeah, exactly. Like they would have never even went to bed that night until they heard about this thing coming. You would just alter your day, right?
100%.
But you don't. And so here's this ode. And so I knew that we have people out there that are owed appreciation, and we couldn't capture it in the moment, or we didn't have a bridge that was really convenient to take that messaging and reach where it needs to go. And so we first had to find out where it was happening at. You know, where is this appreciation happening at? And there's a great book that's off of another book, but it's the same author, and it's the 5 languages of appreciation, right? And how people naturally appreciate you. And one of the things that I realized in my study of all this is that people are appreciating us in the work we do in lots of different ways that means a lot to them, but we don't necessarily see it right away. And in one of the conference talks that I give, talk about what that looks like. What does appreciation through the acts of service look like? What does appreciation through gifts look like, or through any of those different means, right? And then where we notice where this is at, if we have 5, let's say there's 5, right? Then what are some of the nuances of those 5, and how would we capture that with the crew? Because the crew says, oh yeah, well, this person came over there and we came out to the site. It was going to be a headache site to begin with. We already knew there was a boat in the way. We knew that there was a gate and a fence that had to come down, but we showed up that day knowing that this is going to be a paying ticket, and the fence panel's down. There's dead grass. The boat's been pulled out of the way for us, and it's a golden yellow brick road right to the job site. Well, the guys at work, nobody's there, but yet this huge amount of unrequested service has been done to allow us to win in whatever it is. And they did it over their discretionary time on the weekend. This was done ahead of time, obviously. Right. That's massive appreciation. And we kind of glance at it and say, wow, day's better than what it could have been, and we move on. But we don't find a way to note that and circle back to that and say, look, we want to make sure that they know that we know that they really appreciated what we were doing. And so it goes unaccounted for, right? And so the big thing is first understanding how appreciation happens. Where is it coming from? And then getting teams of people to recognize that or know what that is, and then to document at that point, say, let's send this back in. And then once you have all that documented, you know where that is, then it's really up to the organization. It's up to the people receiving the appreciation to circle back and make that connection. And so outside of in the very moment, I didn't have too many options. So one option would be if the person comes out of their house, they're on the phone, they're on hold, right, with probably their internet provider, and they're getting ready to leave in 10 minutes, but the crew is also getting ready to leave. And they're like, I got to run out and tell them they just did a fantastic job, right? So they come out there and they give them just a whale of a verbal, right? And you're like, this is really good. If I had more time, like I would make sure I could tell somebody. Well, that's the moment. The emotional peak is there. The dopamine's there. They're investing the time, and yet they promise we'll call back in. We'll call. We'll make sure, right? Like I did to Jordan, and it's not going to happen. Right. They're going to finish the internet provider. They'll probably even get worked up. Their cortisol is going to go up, and then they realize they're late. They should have left 5 minutes ago. So they hang up on that call and they rush off, and it's never going to be addressed again. You missed it. Right. And they're not going to stop and take time and look up for the 800 number. Like it just is done. So the way you have to do that is you have to have a card or something in place to hand them immediately to short circuit the inconvenience later on of making that call. Because I asked myself, what is it that keeps me from sharing appreciation when I want to do it? And it's been incredible. Like I need to share this because I want more of it. That's the whole purpose of why you do that. It's like, please repeat that in my life. Right. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things is making it really easy. Now, it worked out really well because I had given a compliment to a national rental car booth, checkout booth, exiting. And that person, I said, you know what, they'd really bailed me out. And I said, this is really great. I said, is there any certain way that I should be able to make a note or whatever? And she presented a card and said, here's my name, here's the card, and here's the actual link that goes to this site here. It'd be really more fruitful. If you just went to there, it might actually make its way around or whatever. And I took that and I'm like, that's a lot easier because then you're going through your cards and you're like, oh, here's something I could do. I get it done and it happens, right? So part of the appreciation part is circumnavigating the inconvenience of doing it later because that's where you lose it. That's one piece of it. Then the other part is recognizing the appreciation. And so when we don't recognize it, it's kind of like having this enormous peak of wanting to share them, how your experience was. It's your high. Right. And it falls into a black hole at a corporation. And most people expect that is the case. It's not going to probably you call the call center, it's the call center. And in reality, what you want to know is the person who's at the top of the chain of the person I just interacted with, will they get this message? And so the biggest thing you can do is to close that loop. And we have no choice but to respond to the miserable complaints and the things that we have to. I mean, it's a business task, and it pops up, and you don't have a lot of times to way to schedule it. It interrupts your life, right? And on the appreciation side, both in giving appreciation and receiving it, there's not a demand. There's not a demand, just like news, right? Bad news sells, right? There's not a demand for us to, we'd be like, wow, that's really wonderful. We just file it away. We're awesome, right? Never reach back out.
Right.
They spent an hour and they drafted an entire Word document on font size 11 paragraphs of what we meant to them.
Right.
No callback, And so the way to close that loop is that will be surprising to them because they expect that. They expect it to go into the black hole, is to reach back out. And so what we found is that it's fun to call people back that like you, right?
Sure.
Call them back.
Yeah.
And so that's been good because they don't expect their message to get to someone that really connects with it. So finding out in your own journey mapping of how appreciation comes in and how do you circumnavigate that to the people that are directly involved in the work that happened, right? So that person can on Friday have a great Friday and go call 10 people back that connect with them, that I got it. I really appreciate your time and all that kind of thing. That's important. But that's only one form of communication. And if you were to look at words of appreciation, right? Words of affirmation, words is one of 5 categories that are often talked about. And that's what emails, letters, and phone calls are. Those are the words people. So how are you closing the loop on the people that are acts of service or gift givers or whatever?
Yeah.
Right? You're missing them. And their idea is not giving a gift to somebody at the call center. They're giving a gift to your crew worker, and that's the last you ever know about it.
Yep.
And so you have to have a way to go out and circumnavigate where are those appreciation languages happening so that you can also reach them back and say, you know what? Those guys that you gave your custom fishing lures you make in your garage while you're retired, those signed autographed lures that they were given because they just loved what you did, that's amazing. Yep. And what's really shocking is people like that have no recollection that there would be a system in place to ever receive a message back because they already did the appreciation. They appreciated the 2 crew members in front of them through their acts of service or through gifts, right? But then to have that circle back to them, be like, you know what? That was amazing for giving the gloves or the fishing lures or the whatever it is, the sandwiches. Maybe it's the food, it's the coffee or whatever, right? And so you have to have a way to capture that. Somebody has to, at the crew level, say, this happened. It fits in this category, and you save it somewhere so that it can quickly go up to someone that they would never expect to call them back. And you close that loop. And you're like, I know you gave them a bunch of Subway out there, and it was at 7 p.m. They're doing that ticket, and you really appreciate them, but we heard about your Subway, and it means the world to us. And so it's shocking for some of the meter reader folks, or not readers, but the meter customers on that end, to receive something like that.
Yep.
You know, it's not the call center calling back. It's the person. I got this message.
Yep.
I'm all the way up here in the company, and I'm calling you back to tell you I got it. Like it people are like, wow. And so you start to build what's called advocacy. And the difference between a customer and an advocate is a customer is a contract.
Yep.
So if you wrong them, then you have to resolve that, right? And if you write them, you met the agreement. That's it. And an advocate can be wronged a few times and they're still in. They're not removed from that agreement because they're advocating and representing something that's far bigger than the individual engagements that they went to do business with. And the only way to build advocacy is they have to feel like they're part of something. Mm-hmm. And when somebody from the upper echelon of an organization that they don't even know exists, but they know they're out there, picks up the phone and calls them on a Friday afternoon that said, hey, Tuesday night, when you went out of your way to go get Jimmy John's for the group that cleared the roadway out for you, and then they hauled your trash cans up for you and everything and wish you a great day. We heard about that all the way up here. And we couldn't have a better utility customer out there. And we want you to know that. That's advocacy. That's how you build an advocate out there. So those are some of the things that in the UVM world that are fun to figure out. Yeah. They're very challenging because there's lots of things that get missed and it doesn't give you a good picture of how well you're really doing.
Right. So what job were you performing at the time where this was all this system was coming together for you?
Yeah, I was overseeing vegetation management.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was in the vegetation management department.
Yeah.
And that brought me into other departments that were obviously, as I'm trying to pursue this, call centers, right?
Yeah.
And the customer sat and experience groups, because now you're trying to do something that affects that. And you're trying to get better data. You're trying to find out, are we missing some of the stuff that comes in?
Right.
Because,
right.
They think it's a compliment for a different department. You want to know, do I have all the data here?
Yep.
And then the challenge is, how do you go get more?
Yep. That's a wonderfully representative story of my experience with you, Wes. Here you are managing a vegetation department, and you could probably have just said, well, I know we're doing a better job than what all the data says,
Sure.
but I'm not satisfied with that. I'm going to get to the level of investigating the languages of appreciation and how they're expressed through independent research. But then that's yet not enough. The final conclusion is that, that appreciation has been expressed to the UVM worker, of course, needs to be cataloged, but then it needs to be confirmed, right? Through some other outside contact with somebody on the upper level of the company. And I'm sure they were like, wow, thank you for going to the time and the independent exercise to put all this together to give us an actual more holistic view of how people perceive what is very often kind of a thankless, kind of commoditized service, right?
Right.
I mean, that just is, they're
in shock.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And it personalizes what they felt was very personable in an environment that they feel is very governmental or bureaucratic, where there's no connection, right?
Yeah.
You can ask as many people you want, just say, what is your passionate connection with your utility provider? And just rate what you get. And I think a lot of people are very passionately connected to everything the utility powers. We're passionately connected to our devices, our phones, our comforts, all the things that electricity provides. And we have this large disconnect between how it's even provided,
right,
until the power goes out.
Right.
And then that your life just changed. You need that, right? But it's wherever you can find in a disconnected world a way to reconnect the customer with where it was provided from, you're winning. That's the point of it. And for those that are physical touch, you're like, oh, whoa, we're getting to physical touch. How does that work in appreciation?
Yep.
And the reality is hugs, right?
Yep.
And we had a situation where this gal, we had to trim these wires, right? And it had been pushed off. It's been a refusal. It's all the calamities. And so you have to have, law enforcement come out and utility people, and there's crying, and it's just a really rough day, right? To finally prune something back next to something that can't possibly make contact. And it's very challenging because a lot of these trees have so much emotion attached to them. And if you think about emotion in trees, I can't think of too many things that have more emotion. Some of these trees are planted because of the memorial of somebody's death or somebody's birth. And now there's a conflict much later in life. And yet somebody says, I just can't have you touch anything on this tree, right? So we had that kind of a situation with a widow that was really challenged with the idea of doing this work on this tree. And so it's the typical committee, right? You have this whole committee that has to come out to attend the entire work. And every cut's been predetermined, and it's still, with all of that clarification, we know what's going to happen. The client is still visibly shaken by the whole thing. And you take a utility line clearance arborist that's in their stature and their gear and their grubbiness, from the work and everything. And the crew leader had gotten down and went over to the gal who had been basically crying the entire time and said, here's what I did, and had some cell phone pictures and said, I made the cuts here and here. It's just like we talked about, but there was 2 other things that were dead. It's going to help your tree. I took those out for you. So that's all, great and all that. And at the close of his one directional message, because she really isn't able to say a word in this moment, totally choked up, just not in a great state. We call it a total mess, right? Mm-hmm. But we're not crashing out. Like, that was the meetings 2 weeks ago. So now we're just getting emotionally through this. And he gets through and explains all that. And he has his crew member next to him. And she doesn't say anything at all. She looks up at him and just gives him a monster hug right around his legs, right? And that's the photo the crew leader never wants out there. It's like, hey, here you are at all your stature. There's a lady crying and hugging your legs, right? So anyhow, that's appreciation.
Yep.
That's not appreciation through words, right?
Right.
It's not appreciation through a gift. There's no gift here. She wasn't given a gift in this process.
Yeah.
She was given what she needed in the moment, which was support through something that was so difficult for her. And her appreciation, not able to talk, not in a great situation, was a hug.
Yep.
Circle that one back.
Yep.
When there's time, right?
Yep.
Go back a week later when things have evened out emotionally and say, you know what? You gave us something really powerful that day, and we just want to make sure that you know what? I wasn't there, but I heard that you gave our guys a great big hug, and we really appreciate it. Talk about building an advocate. You'll build an advocate.
Absolutely.
In that situation.
Something that you were alluding to earlier, the disruptions that the utility industry is experiencing from alternate sources of generation of power, sort of connecting to a larger topic that we discussed at our February meetings, which is the trend of these massive CapEx spendings that are expected. You know, we talked about the aggregate data from 54 investor-owned utilities. Somebody went out and added it all up and concluded that they're intending to spend, $1.4 trillion over the course of the next 5 years on not just generation facilities to power AI, but as you suggested, the system hardening, defensible space, system hardening, modernization of utility equipment infrastructure that has not been upgraded in multiple decades.
Right.
There's this interesting, not in my backyard component to the AI situation where communities are kind of resisting the notion of having a data center in their backyards for whatever reason, water consumption or just, the presence of a large looming thing that is negatively associated with AI. What do you make of this scenario, this giant spending that's about to occur, both on behalf of how's this going to affect the utilities and how do you think we're going to play within it?
So if they take on the amount of electricity demand that they need to power everything, there's going to be a massive amount of generation that has to be created. And so they actually have the capability to build the data centers faster than they have the ability to power the data center. And so there was an article I just read about the fact that they were dismantling airplanes because they needed the parts of the jet engine to build some of these components, and that even though that plane is valued at X number of $1 million, that there's a finite number of parts built per year, and it's more valuable. I mean, you're going to crash out 135 million, but it doesn't matter because it's finite. There's going to be no other, parts unless we pull them from this certain type of manufacturer. Right. It's the turbine stuff that they're looking for. So the desire and the demand is probably greater than the capability, and you can't just ramp that up right away. And we probably have some services that could fit right in with things that need to be done in order to build data centers. But how many they go in and where they end up getting located and all that, there's a lot of unknowns around that. But the data is being driven by how much they want to process, obviously. And a lot of that isn't necessarily just adding state-of-the-art services in electric delivery. It's whole other worlds of doing other things, right? So I think power companies have a big opportunity to meet that demand, but I don't think it can go as fast as they want it to go. I think that there's just a lot of concerns. The resident, the neighbor, is having their sea land disrupted. And I've coined sea land to be land that you see, but you don't pay taxes on. And so that's not the shipping company sea land. It's not, these different things. Sea land is when you look out your backyard and you get notice that Walmart's moving in and you bought that home for $500,000 because you would look out your beautiful windows and see nothing but trees and timber. And you find out that you own very little of it, and pretty soon it's going to be a mercury vapor light and a concrete wall,
or a hog confinement center.
Sure, yeah. You name the scenario, right? Yeah. That's sea land, and there's a lot of emotion around sea land. Yeah. A lot of emotion because there's noise pollution and there's resource grab, and then there's the change in what you see. When you look out. So there's an awful lot of community response to that, right? I mean, the community, not all these situations, the community owns the land. It's privately held, and now it's just being in the throes of, can you do what you want with the land you want to buy, right? And so then there's community response, but that's a different part of the aspect around the actual reason why they need to get it up and how they're going to do it.
Right.
And I think there's just a lot of challenges to know what that'll look like. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, part of the thing that was super interesting to me was that a lot of the podcast that I was listening to were making the connection between people thinking that their rate cases are going up, the cost of electricity is going up in direct relationship to or being caused by this AI boom, right? But I think that a deeper point to the discussion was that a lot of it was just the supply and demand of essential components that are much more conventional,
Right.
involved in generation, but also in terms of construction of substations and things like this. Just when you've not built these systems in 30 years, all of a sudden they just cost a whole lot more to construct. And it may, the AI generation situation may be, exacerbating that, but a lot of it is just very fundamental, aged, delayed periods of upgrading systems with, copper and things that are just expensive. And so, how much of the perceived connection to the data centers and people's upset over what they're paying for electricity in places like California, where we do an awful lot of work. I'm really interested to see how that all plays out. How much people continue to make that emotional connection that isn't necessarily like causally sound, and whether or not these CapEx spends come to fruition, right? I mean, I think our company could do very well in this situation. Not only, our plays aren't, certainly we do industrial hygiene within the data centers, and I think we could do a lot of water resource management consulting as it relates to the data centers, and probably the environmental planning around the construction of the data centers. But obviously, if you're going to spend billions of dollars generating that electricity, you're going to build state-of-the-art transmission lines.
Correct.
Right, that take it to the end users or take it to the hyperscalers. We do all the environmental compliance around the construction of those transmission lines. And if you're going to spend billions of dollars on those construction of those transmission lines, you're sure as heck going to make sure vegetation doesn't fall into it, right? So all these, it seems like if this actually comes to fruition, it might be a couple really good years for us here at Wright Service Corp.
Sure can. It's a market disruption. It's also a new market that's emerging. So you imagine the market, what it was like when the push was to get electricity to every milk barn across the state of Wisconsin, right? All those rural lines that went miles and miles with no customers along the way, except that there was a milking barn at the very end of that. And so that infrastructure going in all across, all those transformers that had to be made and put in place, and then they were built to run for a long, long time. And they have now for 70 years. Some of that stuff's been running. And then it comes time to change it out. And then you're like, wow, is the road infrastructure suitable that we can even get this part moved back to replace it? Maybe the location isn't even where we have this anymore. It's a redesign. So those challenges always come up. The data centers use an incredible amount of electricity. And so it's a transmission game, not a distribution one, and also a generation game, because they're eating up as much as some good sized towns. So definitely a challenge there.
Yep. Wes, your time here with us at Wright I associated a lot with Safety 2.0. Tell me, what does that mean? And what have you and your group done to integrate that concept within our operational culture?
Sure. And Safety 2 could be also, it could also be titled Human Organizational Performance. It could be safety differently. There's a lot of different terms. And really what it's doing is it's incorporating the human aspect back into our program. And it gets lost as soon as you realize or think that the human aspect is linear, which it's not. And you build your safety programs around a linear idea. You miss the fact that there's high amounts of variability in things that don't fit into that box. And so for us to learn, I don't think that we could have safety differently it doesn't directly protect the worker. Controls protect the worker, and we're learning that tremendously with energy-based safety and the all of the work that we've got partnered with the CSRA. And controls are what saves lives, but knowing how robust your control is, and knowing what type of control is either missing in place or no longer functioning, has to come from the people. And the principles of this whole category are all driven around the people that are doing the work. And what we found is that you could have a control in place and truly believe that you're protecting the worker, and it's far from it. I was just talking to a group of municipal foresters for the state of Massachusetts yesterday, and one of the things I brought up to them was, have they ever had some sort of ruling or jurisdiction put on them that makes no sense at all, and yet they're supposed to carry it out? And they all raise their hands. They're like, oh yeah, our city's full of this kind of stuff. And that's a disconnect between what's actually happening, right, compared to what we think is happening. And audits and lots of different safety tools that have been out there for a long time haven't been able to actually digest, learn, and understand those differences. And so it's not really new. It's not even really different. There's a whole lot of great leaders within the safety space for the last 70 or 80 years that work is already in place. We can go back and reference it, but it's new in the last 2 decades or 3 decades probably to apply. And it needs to be, because when we look at the great study that Dr. John Ball has provided to our industry, and you see that we've done I don't even know if it's good to say a great job. It's positive, right? But we brought the number of first aid and OSHA recordables and events in volume down in the last 2 decades. But what has not moved whatsoever in 2 decades is the number of life-altering or fatal events in our industry. Still the same number of people are losing their lives every single year. And when you're paid to get up out of bed every day to protect the worker, that's kind of a metric that says probably need to look in a couple of different places than where you have been. And so that's what's providing us the information. We apply these principles and methodologies that allow us to go out and learn from the work environment in a much better way than we have. Instead of finding out what didn't happen, which is really relatively small segment of the actual work you're accomplishing, it's not a good measure to understand where you're successful and where you were lucky. The measurement often is, if it didn't happen, we're happy with that and we move forward, but we don't have a good metric to say, is there things we're missing that can prevent the things we don't want to have happen? And that's right, the heart of the human organizational performance. And we've learned some really large things from the field that we couldn't have possibly designed from the office or thought up ourselves, that having got that information, it's altered really work procedures all across multiple companies. There'll be industry-wide impact by being able to take the time to have these learning environments that are all really directed in how we're going to do it. There's a process and methodology of what you want to do, but once you learn that and implement it, that learning goes nationwide, and that's the value of that type of work that you could not get from somewhere else. So yes, that information helps you get a better control, put a control in place you never knew you need one, or fix one that isn't working so well that you thought was, conquering the world yesterday, and it really isn't. So it's how we understand the work. It's the difference between work imagined versus work is done. And when we only use what didn't happen as our metric to determine our success, we really have no idea at all, because it's really such a small segment of the data, if we're really successful out there or not. And if our job is to ultimately protect the worker, especially around high energy, which is where these large loss of life and life-altering events occur, then we need to spend a good amount of time finding out where is the high energy in our workplaces. First of all, where do we have that exposure? And what are the controls in place that we have that are supposed to mitigate that, whether they're direct or indirect, and are they robust enough? So, you identify that the hazard and the energy, and we go after that. then you look at the control and you have to ask yourself, is this control suitable? And if it's not, what are the frailties of it? And are we trained up on the frailties? Do we know how frail that control is if we don't have anything else? Do we understand that? But lots of names for these different things that are out there. And there's many different avenues, but a lot of the information is a pursuit of increasing the study around some of these things that have been out there a long time. But they're getting woven back into our work because we're not linear. We're highly variable. And it's just one of those things where it doesn't work as simply as we think it does.
I have this perception of safety too always being boiled down in my mind to incidents that maybe used to happen where an AWM wasn't followed and the worker would oftentimes be kind of summarily terminated, maybe they were severely reprimanded, put on a last warning. Maybe they were terminated right out as a result of one handing a chainsaw or something along these lines. And I perceive, and I don't know if this is correct or not, 2.0 as being like, let's remove that immediate summary disposition of the person and turn it into a little bit more of a learning situation. Am I on track at all there?
It's a lot of it. Yeah, because there's context around everything. And that's part of one of the principles is that the context is what drives our ability to really understand what goes on. So if we think it was somebody that just made a choice, most of the time, most being greater than 90%, people come to work every day without the intent of maliciously or intentionally not wanting to cause harm or anything like that. That's the intent. So there are far more pressures. It's not, we put it down to the worker and say, well, it's just the worker's choice to either do that or not. And yet the worker has probably the least influence over the system that they work in. And I was talking about that even with this group yesterday, is that no matter how high your ceiling is individually, you're capped at the ceiling of the organization that you're under. And so when you understand that, you realize that these slogans that sometimes slight our culture, but we love to hang our hat on them, actually drive messaging that isn't true. A great one is that safety is everyone's responsibility. Mm-hmm. And everyone has different roles and responsibility, but safety is not everyone's equal responsibility. That's the truth.
Right.
And when we make it that way, when we assume that it's everyone's role, we remove ourselves from understanding that the system that they're working in, the environment, and the context in which this person is having to execute the work is very linear. Like they have, full control over it. In reality, there's a lot that they don't have control over. And at the front line, they have the highest exposure to the work and the least influence over how it's happening. And for you and I, we have probably the highest influence over the work, and rightfully so, the least understanding of what it really looks like in the mud right there where it's happening. And so for us to bridge that gap, to understand that context is everything, we have to realize there's a lot more things at play around decision-making that happens, knowing that largely the decision-making is positive intent, and understanding what all played into what occurred. And it's a great point there. There's a lot of onus on the company to protect the worker. Mm-hmm. There really is. And the challenge we have in our work is that there are a lot of things that we do that do not have a direct control to protect the worker. It's just, there isn't anything, it's not invented, it's not available, it's just not possible. And so you have indirect controls, you have other layers that you can put into place. And we have this work as imagined. We design a process or procedure or something that we wanted to see executed. And when you get out there and you ask them, can you execute this procedure the way it's written? And they're like, on Tuesday I could, and next Friday and Saturday probably. But if you come out here on any of these other days, that's my ask to you. How do you think I'm supposed to follow that over here in this job? And that's the reality is that we can't possibly imagine the different scenarios and environmental situations and whatever that when we draft this procedure, that could all be involved in it. And so what happens is the worker ends up becoming the bridge between how we imagine the work being done and how it's actually being executed. We think, without having any metrics or data, that we design something great because they must be out there following it.
Yep.
And in reality, there's a lot of times where the work gets done in a way that has to be modified because they're faced with something that we couldn't have imagined, and so they bridge that gap, and they bridge that gap with the amount of risk understanding and training and knowledge that they individually have. And so it's right to them in that moment. And a lot of the things that happen when we look at the work and they're like, I can't believe they made that decision or that they thought that way or whatever. So much supporting data and research on it that most often any other human being put in a very tight, confined time frame space would probably in their perception react in the very same way. So when we start to have more context around the fact that we have a human worker out there making those bridges, our success is really their bridge from what we design and what they execute. There's more to look at. That's the first question, really summarizing all these other do anything you fill in the blanks, new view, is that if we want to be something that has a robust system, we have to be really good at learning. And we've won tremendously in some things that we've learned as a company around asking this question. This is the toughest question to ask. It's also a tough question to answer. And the question to answer is, you ask the audience, is there anything that you do that is incredibly successful for how your day goes that likely nobody else out there knows about? And there's a lot of reasons to never answer that question from the worker. And the reason being is that if they answer that, it's more often thought that if they share whatever this is that helps them get through their day and it helps them succeed in their job or whatever the task is, whatever they're doing, that the corporation will likely find out about it and remove it from them. They'll take it away. So they're like, why would I want to share that? They'll just come down and clamp down and say, no, you can't do it that way. We're not going to, that's the pressure. Okay. And you got all these forestry utility folks in a room, and they're all leading all those different municipal type organizations. And I asked them, I said, what do you think would happen? Do you think that if you had something that was outside of what your city knows is going on, you don't have a procedure for it, it's how you handle it, it works good for you, is it fruitful to tell your whole corporation, or is it fruitful just to keep it to yourself? Right? They all answered, you don't tell the corporation.
Yeah.
Right. It's a trust thing. It's a pattern.
It's a competitive advantage.
Sure.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's personal.
Yeah.
It's personal. Right.
Right.
However, if the corporation knew what was successful and could embrace it versus chastising it or making it put away, the success is incredibly multiplied when it goes somewhere else. And so things that we weren't able to solve, we being the industry, in terms of addressing certain hazards out there, have been solved with methodologies that a couple of people were doing out there. Like, well, I do it this way and it works great. And you go look and you're like, man, that really does address it. And now it's the responsibility of you and I having the most influence over the system and the least amount of proximity to those hazards is to get it out. That's our onus, is to get that information out. First, we have to build the trust and learn. Yeah. And then it's our role to then get it out to everyone else that has a similar exposure.
It's a beautiful way of putting it. The most distance from the danger, but the highest degree of responsibility to remove it from the system.
Right. You imagine a worker and how much role and responsibility. They don't have an authority to order things. They don't have an authority to set up a procurement arrangement for something that's missing on their job site. They don't have the order to modify the equipment. They don't have a lot of different things that could allow them to maybe make change themselves, but then you don't have continuity, right? And so they don't have the same authority, so they also don't have the same level of responsibility around worker protection.
Right.
And that's why that responsibility is heavy on us.
The last thing I want to talk to you about today, Wes, is the Will Nunner Training Center for Safety Excellence. And I don't know if that's actually the name that we're going to call it, but it probably is pretty close to something like that.
Sure.
Tell our audience, if you could, what I'm referring to, what stage we're at with this resource, and what's your kind of long-term hope for how our company is going to leverage this training center?
It's exciting all the way around. It's a very large investment, and the ROI will be huge. So we'll have plenty of volume on that. If you think back to training and our footprint, it's very difficult to take subject matter experts that are in one location and reach all the people that need to know what they need to know. And so in summary, what this building's going to allow us to do is to, from one location in a controlled environment, reach an enormous amount of our footprint that way. And that'll be one way, and that's through virtual entirely. And then there's hybrid level of learning that we can do from that event. And then there's live and in person. The capabilities of the building will have some things involved in it that nowhere else in the industry is happening at this point. And we'll have real trees to climb inside there. And there's nothing better than training with exactly what it is that your real environment looks like. We've been climbing on aluminum truss for a long time, and that's been great. It's rated and it gives you all the things you need to have an at-height experience, but it responds and reacts and gives you the environment nothing like a real tree will. So having 4 really, really large trees to climb indoors is going to be incredible, and having just a really state-of-the-art ability to put on full events, productions, and communications, both internal and external, from that facility is what it's designed to do. But I think back years ago in my own arboricultural beginnings, and some of those challenges are our same challenges today. And so when I was 11, I was on a rural electric utility cooperative. And whenever I heard a chipper or a chainsaw start up, I would get on my bike and go find out where it was going on. And I would spend the rest of my day watching the tree crew. And so
you were 11 doing this.
Yeah. So most people say they fell into this. I didn't fall into it. I pursued it. So I've been after arboriculture for a long time. Right. I already got the Hoosier ecologist, the junior naturalist programs through the DNR and all these things. I had that crushed by 11. And so
Hoosier ecologist. So that's phenomenal.
There's all these different programs, right? Well, what happens is in a rural electric co-op that has only 6 employees in the field, right? And you imagine these 6 employees, that's your troublemen, that's your line workers and your install maintenance folks, that's your vegetation workers, and that's your substation crew, right? They know the whole system. It's a small grid. And those 6 people, when it's kind of tamed down, go out and they start trimming trees, right? That's the next process of it. And back then I knew enough with the Arbor Day Foundation, which is already underway, that the methods in which they are pruning and trimming trees was brutal. It was all just pollarding and topping and internode cuts, and it was just clearance, not appearance. And there wasn't any kind of science behind what they're doing. And I already had mailed away, and this is back tying into the building, I had mailed away to the Arbor Day Association back then, so 80s, right? Because that's what you did. You couldn't go to their website, right? You had to send, you'd filled out a questionnaire and you would send it off, and it says 4 to 6 weeks, before you hear back. And then they would send you all their trifolds or whatever. You would physically get it and look through. Right. And they had programs.
This user experience theme is connecting.
It's connecting. My whole life. Right. And so I would get the trifold. I'm like, perfect for $1,500 a person back then. Back then they had a program where you could send your utility people or whoever to Arbor Day, to Nebraska. They had a program back then where you would get trained on utility best practices for pruning. It was just still a dawning thing, right? It was just coming out. And I thought, that's what they need. These guys, they need that because they're just chopping all these trees up and climbing. So I created my own petition, and I went door to door to get people to sign it. And then I was going to have my mom drive me to the council meeting to provide that. And my whole petition was to have 2 workers from our co-op go get this training on proper pruning and all that kind of stuff through the Arbor Day. And I remember knocking on doors. I would go to the most affluent ones because I'm like, all right, I need somebody that's influential here. So you knew the different folks that were in the town. I'm like, I'm going to go straight up there. I'm not going to start low. Like, I need to get some signatures.
Rockefellers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was the Icorns at this time. They were the veterinarians of the town. So I was knocking on the door, and they're like, well, is this going to impact my taxes? And I said, taxes? I was thinking for a minute. I'm like, shoot, I don't have one for that. Like, I don't even know what taxes are necessarily, but I'm like, here, I'm 11. If you like what you're seeing over here, or if you don't like it, right, sign here because we're going to we're going to do this thing. So
anyways, taxes are the price we pay for civilization. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you. Sign right here.
That's right. Yeah, they would have understood that. So that was my first failed attempt at doing something innovative, and it didn't go through. We didn't get it passed. That was it was going to be probably $3,000. Imagine in 1989 or whatever, $3,000 to send two guys to go get some trimming experience that they didn't have. They didn't even understand there was anything wrong with what they're already doing. The industry wasn't educated at this point. So there's just a lot of challenges around it. The challenge I had there is that I had to physically go educate. I had to physically show up and educate people. I had to physically mail away for information. And so I had a massive disconnect between what I wanted to accomplish and where the information was stored. We have a lot of great people in this company, incredible, all over, that are subject matter experts in everything. And we still have a challenge around the footprint of where all the need is for that knowledge and to bridge the gap. Yeah. And so the goal with this building is through technology to be able to truly start to bridge gaps between people that are facing whatever the task is in front of them and the person that could directly help them. Yep. And that's a big theme or highlight that we'll be able to accomplish.
That's beautiful. Some 11-year-olds were passionate about T-ball. The twins, you were out there petitioning the local utility board to go teach these people some basic ANSI standards, right? You probably had this in your mind already. You were like, there's got to be some ways that you can trim these trees that'll contribute to the growth of the tree and also be safe for the worker. And you were perhaps destined for this role in life. I think
there you go.
Is a pretty fair way of putting it.
I was told that somewhere in a cache of family photographs somewhere is a photo of me sitting on a bucket upside down with a clipboard, evaluating the tree crew as they were cutting.
If only
in my yard,
only we could get this picture.
I'm looking for it.
Please do.
I'm looking for it. It's a classic.
You're a wonderful person, Wes. Very few people I can think of that have made the impact in our company that you have in the short period of time that you have. I'm so proud to have you as an employee of Wright Tree.
Thank you.
And I'm thrilled that you came on the podcast. I think this is going to be a banger. So thanks for coming on, man. This is a great conversation.
Thanks for the invite.
I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Appreciate it very much.
All right, brother. Thank you for joining us today on Insert Title Here. Once again, I'm your host, Austin Kennedy. I hope you enjoyed the show. My sincere thanks to my good friend, Wes Tregilgas, for joining us. Please leave any comments or questions on our YouTube channel and make sure to tune in to the next episode.